if you're in a tech organization and you're not even in recruiting, and you start seeing that suddenly all the recs get placed on hold, there's a headcount freeze.
You see the writing on the wall.
That's a major red flag. And it's almost, I don't think I've ever seen a circumstance where that's happened, where things went back to normal again. It's almost every case that has led to layoffs. And if they're sitting in a town hall meeting and they're saying, we're not thinking layoffs, we are not doing layoffs, there's no plans to do layoffs. They are absolutely planning to do layoffs, and they absolutely already have the list of people who are being laid off in their hand while they're telling people that they're not doing layoffs.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. Today I have with me someone who's going to be very valuable to this audience because unfortunately we have been the victims of quite a few rounds of layoffs and it doesn't seem like those are stopping anytime soon. So with me here today I have Bryan Creely of A Life After Layoff. He was a corporate recruiter across a couple different industries, including but not limited to tech, for 20 plus years or so, and has shifted into career coaching, job search coaching, and content creation. He has a fantastic YouTube channel that you all should check out. I'll put it in the show notes, and just thrilled to have you here today to help all of us out in this tech industry.
Yeah, excited to be here. Yeah, this should be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. So, Bryan, can you tell us a little bit about your path? What led you from corporate recruiting to where you are today, and some sort of background on you as a human being?
Yeah, that's like the tell me about yourself question.
I know. We all love that one, right?
Yeah, it's like, how do you answer it? So, so in the context of a podcast, I will go in the more verbose and kind of long-winded way because probably can get away with it. However, if you're in an interview, you want to be nice and concise and related directly to the job that you're applying to.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Right. This is not an example to set. So I guess a little bit about me. I have been in human resources and or probably more specifically in the recruiting function for the better part of 20. Gosh, I'm starting to age myself. I've gotten more gray too as
it's okay. It's okay. We embrace that here at It Gets Late Early.
Yeah, it's like if you actually look at my videos from my very first YouTube videos to now, it's like it's really bad. I was looking at it earlier. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I've been doing it for over 20 years now, and almost every single role, with the exception of maybe one short stint where I was in a more of a creative marketing role, I have been had some capacity of hiring people, whether I'm being the primary point of contact or being as part of a recruitment team or even as a hiring manager. So I've kind of the whole gamut in all size companies, all size organizations, ton of different industries. I've been in Fortune. I worked for Amazon, so that's probably like Fortune 5 in the world. And I've worked at small mom and pop companies. I've worked at FedEx. I've worked at Ford Motor Company, a subsidiary. They were so big that they spun off a parts division, and it became a Fortune 50 company itself. So I worked for the Fortune, the parts division. And it's like, so a lot of plant-based stuff, manufacturing was kind of a heavy focus, a lot of engineering. I then shifted into more of a tech focus a little later on in the career. I've had dabbles with it throughout my career. Worked in a lot of, I've worked in the startup, so a tech startup, most or more recently. So I've got a full gamut of recruiting experience. I've kind of done a little of everything from doing mass hiring where I'd be standing up on stage, giving presentations to a whole bunch of hourly workers, like in a plant setting, to setting up ATS. Actually, I've set up the ATS system for an organization.
That's applicant tracking system, right?
Yeah, sorry, applicant tracking system. That's basically, and we can dive into that later, but there's a lot of confusion around what an ATS system is. It's not nearly as sinister and as scary as people think it is, but I've set up the back end of hiring systems, gone out and trained hiring managers from basically ground level. One of the places I walked into didn't even have their hiring system was manila folders that were stacked on my boss's desk at the time.
So they haven't been digitally transformed, is what you're saying.
At the time, yeah. Now, since then, we've made a lot of progress. But at the time, I had done that, walked in. So I'm basically creating hiring systems from scratch. So kind of like essentially the full gamut of recruiting, but it's all been every job, even though I have a human resource background as well, I've kind of made a decision a few years back to specialize in recruiting because that's what I enjoyed the most is the hiring of people. And I like dealing with employee relations, although sometimes that would kind of come back to bite me. But I like the human aspect, the human relations, the employee relations, and recruiting. And so I just made a purposeful decision a few years ago then to just focus strictly on the recruitment side of things. And maybe it wasn't the smartest move at the end of the day because recruiters tend to be the last ones hired, and then obviously the first people fired in organizations, as tech has found out the hard way through layoffs. So.
Although you did have a heyday there. I mean, there was a moment when
like 5
it was,
minutes. Yeah,
it was really hot though for a second, and I kept thinking to myself, "Why am I not in on this? What am I missing out on?"
Yeah, but the whole time I'm sitting here thinking, when that was happening, the whole time, this is not going to last.
Like it's a bubble; it's going to burst.
And that's why I will never fault somebody. I hear a lot of like people throwing shade at tech, like saying like, "Oh, the guy who went to Google and made $500,000 a year, they're not worth it. I don't feel bad for them if they get laid off. Like they took too much money." And I will never feel bad for somebody getting their money, especially when you have layoffs and people
don't hate the player, hate the game.
I mean, you have every bit the ability to go get that job too, if you want, so
people can be very mean.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. And as you do more content, you'll start to realize that people are very opinionated. And I've also learned that the people who have the least amount of experience in a thing tend to be the most opinionated about a thing.
That's fun.
It's like I'll see comments, and I love my audience. Don't get me wrong. There's some trolls that'll come in occasionally, but people will declare that this is the best way to do this and this is how it works, and I'm sitting there just going like, oh gosh, it's like
I've seen this.
Your advice is so out in left field. So there is a lot of confusion and a lot of there's a lot of misconceptions around recruiting, specifically in how to get position yourself or how to get into big tech, for example, where people have preconceived notions of what hiring is, and some of their conclusions. I can see why some people will be very jaded and very bitter and very frustrated, but some of the conclusions that people come up with are a bit head scratching. But how I started where I am today, how I got to where I am today, is back in 2020, I actually experienced an untimely a layoff. I was at the time living in the Chicagoland area. And my wife and I decided that we wanted to relocate south to get to, it's a lot cheaper, better weather, et cetera. Kind of the typical reasons why a lot of people will leave. So we ended up moving, and I was working in a remote recruiting job at the time. I'd never had official approval to relocate, even though I was working remote, or more of a hybrid. I was working probably 75% remote. And I remember trying to get my boss to sign off on like, hey, I'm moving. Other people on our team sat remote, but there was a few of us that sat and did hybrid, or a couple of people actually went into the office every day. And he never could get me the blessing. It wasn't him. He was always trying to get a layer up from him to sign off on it. And finally, we'd already committed to move. There's a lot of personal reasons why we were moving. And it was like that ship was already sailing. And so I rented a U-Haul truck, drove down to Nashville. We got there on a Friday night. Saturday and Sunday unloaded the truck, and then I was going to take the truck back to the U-Haul on Monday morning when it opened back up again, and then I was going to start my first day in Nashville working. Well, I get an email from the CHRO on Monday morning. Suddenly there's this meeting that popped up on my inbox, and I'm like, what the hell is this all about? And then
so that's a rough one. I've seen that in my inbox before.
This is after we were in town hall meetings, right before. This is during like the whole COVID pandemic where everything was shutting down. All of our recs had been pulled. Like this was May timeframe. All of our recs had been pulled since the December of the previous year. And everybody was, I don't know if you can't recall back at that point, everybody was in like a wait and see. Nobody was hiring. And then this whole pandemic. So it was like a lot of panic and fear in the market. And so we didn't have I had no recs. And when you're a recruiter that doesn't have any recs, that's always a huge, yeah. And anytime I've ever been in an organization where anything gets put on hold, headcount gets placed on hold, I mean, if you're in a tech organization and you're not and even in recruiting, and you start seeing that suddenly all the recs get placed on hold, there's a headcount freeze. That's a major red flag, and it's almost I don't think I've ever seen a circumstance where that's happened where things went back to normal again. It's almost every case that has led to layoffs. And if they're sitting in a town hall meeting and they're saying, we're not thinking layoffs. We are not doing layoffs. There's no plans to do layoffs. They are absolutely planning to do layoffs, and they absolutely already have the list of people who are being laid off in their hand while they're telling people that they're not doing layoffs. And literally,
I'm so glad you're saying this because I'm such a cynic, and I'm like, I swear,
no, it's
anytime you
100%
hear
true.
that,
It's like
that's okay.
that's like a truth, like a universal truth of
You heard it here.
yeah. So I got the call. This is like literally 2 weeks earlier. They had said no, there's no layoff plans. And so when I got the call, this meeting popped up. The CHR. I talked to my boss, and I'm like, "Do you know anything about this?" And she's like, "I don't. I'm sure it's just a step level meeting. Maybe they just want to meet." And then I was talking to the director, and he didn't know anything about it. And so then, of course, I get the call, and they give me the news, and I'm sitting there going, like, you gotta be kidding me. And so I walk into he actually, my boss ended up getting laid off too. Several people on my team, but
Were
my
you
boss ended up
laid off en masse, or were you a one-on-one layoff situation?
they actually handled it as far as layoffs are concerned. She actually handled it the correct way. So
And just what
I
is
guess
that way, by the way? What's the correct
actually,
way to
like,
handle a layoff?
calling and telling you face to face, like
Yeah.
having a conversation and not being through email. Cause we've seen so many really horrible stories
Gosh,
about people
so
getting laid
many.
off. So then, I get this layoff, and immediately I obviously dealing with the shock of the news. So I walk into my wife is in the bedroom. I walk in there, I go, she looks at me, she immediately knows something's up. And I go, I just got laid off. She's like, you got to be kidding me! Because we had plans to buy a house. We had a 6 month old baby, and we were planning on expanding our family from there. All of this stuff got placed on hold. I told my wife, like, moving to Nashville, she didn't want to leave. We had a house up there. We sold it, and she's like, I'm gonna get you a nicer house. Like, everything's
You
gonna
were
be
really
good.
selling it.
Yeah, I was like
Yeah.
really selling it, and we get there, and like, so now all that stuff got
Are you
placed.
kidding?
She was like a saint with it. I mean, she was super supportive, but
You married the right
um,
person.
yeah, for sure. And so 3 days went by. Like, I mourned for the first day because I think that's healthy when in a layoff. You need to mourn.
Stages of
You need
grief.
to, like, the stages of grief. You need to, like, get pissed off. You need to, you need to go through all of the, like, well, why did I get chosen and not that person? And it was because of, and you run through all the scenarios in your head, and you kind of, that's just part of, like, the grieving process. And then on day two, that was kind of like what I was going through. And then panicking, like, probably did a little bit of panic applying, not gonna lie, probably threw together an outdated resume, and like we call my Frankenstein resume, the resume that had gotten me hired for several other companies, but at this point was like super out of date. And I was like just adding to the end of it. So I'm like probably panic applying a little bit the first day or two. And then by like the third day, and I'm sitting there going, like, I can't believe this. Like, all of my momentum that we were trying to get this house. We'd already been, like, visiting with, like, going and looking at houses and builders and things like that. And so, like, all of that gets pulled out from underneath you in an instant. And now, and that time at the market, I know the market it seems bad. It's not a good market right now, but it was particularly bad then, where nobody was hiring. At least here, I do see people that are getting, that are finding employment. And, I think we're kind of like a little bit of this. We had this massive wave of layoffs that happened at the beginning of the year, late last year into the beginning of the year. And I think it's slowed down the second half of the year, which is good. I mean, it doesn't feel good for those of you. I mean, it's still not a good market, and some people are still experiencing layoffs. But at that time in 2020, nobody was hiring. The best jobs that you could find from a recruiting perspective were working for these, like, little cruddy agencies who were, like, slimy. I remember one guy I talked to, I applied for this one job, and he contacted me, and the only thing he wanted to know was what companies I could bring with me to, like, for the book of business. Like, that's all he cared about. Didn't want to know anything about anything. So it would be like companies that I wouldn't have given the time of day in a normal market. And so that's kind of what I was dealing with. And by the day 3 after my layoff, and this is what I was seeing on the open market, I just told my wife, I said, I am not going to sit here and feel sorry for myself. I'm not going to wallow in pity. I am going to take ownership of my situation finally, because I had tried to start a few other businesses over the years, tried to be self-employed, and with varying degrees of success. But I decided at that time, I'm no longer going to do this. I'm tired of being they have dictated my ability to buy a house, to have a baby, to pay my bills, to live my life, to where I could move, how I could move, when I could move. And I just felt like completely powerless in that regard. So I told my wife the morning of the third, I woke up, jumped out of bed, and I said, damn it, I'm gonna make a business. It's gonna be called A Life After Layoff, and I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna teach people how to, like, there's so much confusion, and because I had noticed this when I was recruiting, I noticed how many people just struggled with, like, presenting themselves and marketing themselves effectively. And I used to pull and I would talk to people in interviews, and I knew I wasn't going to hire them, but they struggled so bad that I would spend the second half of my interview sometimes, not all the time, but like spend some time. I'd be like, hey man, I'm not going to hire you, but can we just talk for a minute? Like, let me just,
What
here's
a
how I want
gift,
you.
though.
Yeah.
What a gift to that person.
Yeah. So whether they took my advice, at that time, I don't know. They probably were just pissed off, but anyway, I I ended up finding that there was a big need for that, because there's such big confusion about how it actually works behind the scenes, and these people come up with these, like, just these insane ideas of what recruiting actually is and how it works behind it. They come up with these, like, sinister, like, there's these, like, evil, like, this evil room of, like, this sinister cabal of, like, you know the Illuminati sits back there and, screws around with things. And it's really just not the case. It really, most of the issues with recruiting are crappy processes, companies trying to play catch up, maybe have grown too fast or had nothing in place before, and they're putting band-aids on everything, and hiring managers that don't value the recruiting process at all, or say that they do but don't really live it, and they're non-communicative, they don't participate, they kind of hot potato over the recruiting, they throw recruiting under the bus. Like, recruiting is the most loveless job I've ever, like, you get hate from the candidate, you get hate from the hiring teams, you get hate from everybody, like, and nobody, like, no, there's no pat on the back. Like, my boss used to tell me, if you got into recruiting for a pat on the back, you're in the wrong business. So, and it's very true. Like, everybody hates the recruiter, and then, like, and no matter what you do, like, if the hiring manager is slow to get back with feedback, or has some sort of stupid requirement, or they say, we're not going to hire this person because they don't meet these requirements, or they don't fit our mold, or whatever, then the recruiter is the one that has to deliver that message, even though they may not agree with it. But we're kind of forced into that situation. So there's not really a whole lot of love lost. But long story short, I I ended up deciding that at that point in time, I'm going to create a company. I'm going to create a service that helps people truly reclaim control in their career. It originally started off as, I'm going to help people get back from being laid off. I'm going to help them get back into the workplace as fast as they possibly can, to get back to life and living again. But as I've kind of grown over time, or as my message has evolved, it really became more than that. And it became more of, how do you actually reclaim the control in your career? In other words, how do you act like, it's like ripping the band-aid off of this love affair with careers and how people think careers should be. And I think it's probably a generational thing, honestly. Like, older generations, you could work at the same place for an entire career. As you get into, like, the newer generations, I'm not going to date myself by what what generation I'm in, but that's no longer a thing. And people, the sense of betrayal, it's almost like, if you know that you're going to get betrayed, then you can handle yourself differently. And I know that sounds really cynical, and that's not really my intention. But if you know the rules of the game, if you know that you're probably not safe unless you're a superstar candidate, or you're somebody that has positioned yourself with meticulous precision, everybody is at risk on some level, depending on the type of job. So you're not, there is a strategy involved with careers. And as I've talked to thousands of people in coaching sessions and candidates, and I kind of started to realize that it's really more, people don't treat their careers like they're the owner of their career. They outsource it to somebody else. I
Or
want somebody to
chance,
write my
right?
resume. Yeah, or chance. Yeah, that's probably even more common. I want to outsource my resume writing to somebody else. I want somebody else to do the work for me. I want my boss to give me a promotion. I want the company to pay me money to do this job. Like, that's all putting your ownership onto somebody else to do the right thing. And then when they do what they do, because it's like, let's face it, business is a very, it is what it is. It's there to design to make money for the shareholders,
Yep.
first and
Shareholder
foremost.
value creation. That's
And
it.
if you're
That's
not
all.
adding value, the minute you are no longer valuable to them, and that could shift from day to day. And so, what have you done for me lately? If, as long as the minute you're no longer valuable for them and their bonus, like a lot of these senior leaders get bonuses based on, so they have to make strategic moves, and you are a cog in a wheel. You are a pawn for them to be able to do it. And it's not meant to be, it sounds cold, but it's like, you kind of have to accept that that's how it is.
You absolutely do. You
And
can't will it away. It just is.
yeah, and so it's like, no amount of complaining about things is going to change that. No amount of like, it's all their fault. And then, like, being this, like, basically what you do is you become powerless when you start to put your power to other people, and then you just complain about it. And so
it's toxic,
it is,
It's
it is a toxic thing.
self-fulfilling prophecy too. It's
And
like
absolutely.
it's race to the bottom.
So then that's where it's kind of morphed into, how do you actually take control back in your career and become the CEO of your career? Because that's ultimately what it's all about, is reclaiming the power, no longer being a victim. Because I would say the single most prevalent mindset of people who struggle in their career is the victim mentality. It's always somebody else's fault. It's the company's fault. It's the recruiter's fault. It's my boss's fault. It's society's fault. Rather than taking ownership and saying, okay, I know that it's not fair. I know that the world is stacked against me. I know that their only goal is to make the most amount of money for their shareholders. So I should behave the same way for myself and put myself first. It doesn't mean that you're going to be in there being a bull in a china shop. It doesn't mean you're going to be telling everybody to F off. It doesn't mean, yeah, but it means that you approach your career with a degree of strategy, knowing that you are the only one looking out for you at the end of the day.
That is brilliant. That, I wish everybody could hear just what you said there, right? That's critical advice. It's like, you got to accept the laws of gravity, right? This is how it is. Now, what are you going to do with it, right? You got to make a path for yourself. I love that.
Yeah, so we've got two choices. We can either continue to be the victim and continue to suffer lackluster results in our careers, and continue to not reach our goal and continue to tread water, or we can learn the rules of the game and then use them to our advantage. Because here's the thing, 99% of the world, of the population, is not playing the game properly. If you just play the game, if you just learn to play the game properly, you will be ahead of 99% of people. And it's not even that, it's more of a mindset shift than it is anything. But it takes work. It's like, it's not easy. It's not easy to change habits and to change your mindset and to start to play with strategy, because it requires you to do something that it's like that thing, like, habits take a certain amount of repetition before they actually set in. It's the same thing with careers and a career mindset, and doing like why did that guy get promoted and not me? Like,
we've all asked that question.
Yeah, sure. I've asked that question. I've been pissed off. Like, how the hell did that person
that
yeah. And I mean, we've all had that experience, but you have to look at the end of the day, were they better at like, were their skills better than mine? Maybe not, probably not, but maybe they were. Do they know how to market themselves more effectively? Probably. Did they know how to play the political game, the unsavory political game a little bit?
Yeah.
And nobody wants to play the political game, but everybody gets pissed off whenever they get passed up for promotion. And I go, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to. So it's like learning how to play the game the correct way, and within the context of recruiting, it's how do you, if you know how companies, not just one company, but companies hire and how they operate and how they select people and how they create jobs and all that kind of stuff, you can use that knowledge to be strategic and give yourself the higher likelihood of getting and being, like somebody said, well, you can't, a lot of these people just get these jobs because they're lucky. And I'll say, sure, luck actually absolutely plays a part in it. There's no doubt about it that being in the right place at the right time is how, and I have some anecdotal stories I could tell you about people being in the right place at the right time. I probably won't share them because I don't want to throw some people under the bus, but absolutely being in the right place at the right time can pay huge dividends. And sometimes you just need that one break, that one break that sets you on a totally different career path. It's like you're in the right place at the right time. You get a promotion, you get that title, and suddenly the floodgates open for you and a whole other litany of opportunities.
And then you can even fail up. I've seen that a lot too.
You can,
where people get the title.
Yeah, probably even more common, right? Like how many of us have worked for really bad bosses that are,
I mean, never, no one ever. Yeah.
So we have the choice of being the victim, or we have the choice of taking ownership, learning to play the game, and setting ourselves apart and really doing what is necessary. Now, not everybody's career minded. Not everybody wants to climb the corporate ladder, but it doesn't even matter. Even just trying to stay as a peak level individual contributor, everybody wants to earn more money. I don't know anybody on this planet that says, I don't want to earn more money. Maybe the guy that's saying, like, I don't want to earn more money because that means it's more responsibility. But you know what? The person that's making 20% less is still getting laid off too.
That's a really good point. I hear some people say, hey, I'm glad that I'm not paid as well as some other people because maybe I'll be less likely to be on the chopping block.
Yeah, it's like that's the ironic thing. Like you hear like these people getting laid off at like Meta and Google, and they're pulling in these like stupid level salaries, and then the person at the smaller company is gone, yeah, well, I don't feel bad for them. They made all that money. They were overpaid to begin with, and they don't have. And then I'll say, well, why would you ever feel bad for somebody getting the most money? They actually acted like the CEO of their career. They got the money, and guess what? Your pink slip's coming tomorrow too. You're both going to be unemployed. This person's going to have a couple $100,000 more dollars in their bank account than you, though.
Jokes on you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like the mindset, it's kind of like, I don't want to sound like harsh because that's not my intention, but like, it's kind of like there's a winner and a loser mentality on some level where, the winners don't make excuses. I've never heard somebody be critical of somebody that's already achieved success or achieved something is never going to criticize the person who hasn't achieved it and is trying to. It's the person who hasn't achieved anything that is going to be the most critical of somebody endeavoring into a new path. So, that's another universal truth around the mentality shift of like acting like the owner of your career. And I'm hoping that doesn't sound cliche, but I think it's a really powerful way to look at your career is how do you own what happens to you? And instead of being the victim, taking ownership and moving into a place of authority in your career where you set up like this whole thing concept's kind of touching on like luck. Some luck absolutely happens, but you can actually create your own luck by being in the right place at the right time with the right skills and the right tools and the right people and doing it purposefully. And that's not luck. That's called having strategy in your career. And that's kind of where this whole thing that I started has kind of morphed to, is teaching people how to do that. So that's kind of like a really, really long, convoluted story about how I started till where I am today. So that's kind of
very resonant. It's completely on point for this audience. So I loved it, and great stories throughout. So that was wonderful. And speaking of the concept of, taking reality as it is, and, what will be, right? The que sera, sera kind of mentality, and looking at what we have in play and not willing it to be otherwise because it is what it is. Speaking of the fact that there are those truths that are in our career sort of paths, right? And there are certain things in play that we can't change, right? Like for example, we can't change the fact we've all been born, at least I would say in the US, into an incredibly ageist society. Like we all have had messages pummeled at us since pretty much we were born that getting older is not something we want to do, which I find intensely ironic because of course the goal is to continue to breathe air, right? And keep on getting older, right? But we're not allowed to do it. We're not allowed to show signs of it, et cetera. And so, because of all of those stereotypes that are in place, and because of all of that sort of language that's been driven to us throughout our lives, of course, there is ageism that comes and seeps into the job search process and into the interview process and into the realities of being an employee at companies across all industries. So, how do you help people? Because I know you have some videos on your YouTube channel that do talk about ageism specifically. So how do you help people take ownership over their age and actually try to position it in as great a light as possible? And also, conversely, almost, right? How do you share with people how to potentially look a little bit younger so that you don't find yourself having people biased against you? You give yourself more of a shot at getting an interview, at landing a job, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. Ageism does exist, and it's one of the many biases that employers have, even if they don't feel like they have it. It's a subtle thing, and it's not generally something that's even spoken about behind closed doors directly, because I think nobody wants to feel like they're discriminatory or that they have an outward bias. But you'll hear hiring managers make these comments in intake calls where we'll be sitting down with them to review the new open job requisition that just came and that we got assigned, and we'll sit down with the hiring manager and we'll go through and kind of walk through the details of the job and the job posting and everything, and they'll make these subtle comments when we're like looking at what kind of experience do they need, what kind of experience don't you want, and they'll say they'll say subtle things like about the candidate profile that they want, and then we'll kind of challenge some of those aspects. At least a good recruiter should be challenging some of those aspects. One of the things that's really common is I think them saying like candidate fit or fit for the
Yeah.
job, what
Culture
the
fit.
intention, like what the it's like really what's the intention of the job. And I'll kind of give an example of when I was recruiting for a lot of college graduates at one point in time, the college programs, and the purpose of the program was to get they didn't use the term young leaders,
Yeah.
but fresh
But
leaders
yeah,
into the organization that
fresh.
they could groom to grow up without any bad habits or whatever, and so that
Oh
they
my
could
gosh.
evolve into the next wave of leadership. So and these are pretty common. In fact, I started in one when I first graduated from
Yeah,
college.
there are plenty of them. I went through
But
one at Bloomberg for young grads. Yeah, same
yeah, so
thing.
they would send you on like rotational type of things, and it's like those are pretty common. And when we were hiring for them, there was a profile that they would look for, and it would be, a college graduate that was starting into their career. Didn't Even if somebody had a couple of years of experience, they probably weren't a job fit for what the hiring manager had determined they wanted, because they wanted, in their mind, what they're solving for with this program is to bring in a new wave of, like, for succession planning of people who are considered up and coming, high potential, this up and coming, like what is, like, yeah, malleable, like what is up and coming, and how do you actually define that? It could up and coming be the guy that's worked, or the woman that's worked in another organization for 40-30 years and never got her shot, and then comes here and, for whatever reason didn't have the ability or the opportunity to demonstrate her competency, but then comes here. And we would, you challenge a hiring manager and say, well, what if I found a 45-year-old that decided to go back to school and was a fresh college grad, but but they would say things like, well, that doesn't really fit the mold of what we were looking for. We want somebody that doesn't have habits already that we have to break. And, like, so what does that actually mean? It's like the mold still has to be legal, right? Like you can't discriminate in that, but it's an unspoken thing that if I were to put a 50-year-old fresh college grad into an interview process for that management development program, the chances of them being taken seriously are pretty slim, even though they may have all the competencies and they may actually have all these real life skills and experiences and a work acumen and a work ethic. Let's face it, like a strong work ethic that, that is demonstrated,
And
but
mentorship capabilities to
and
help all the
mentorship
other younger people, right?
but because it
Yeah.
doesn't fit the mold, then they would say things like, well, they're a flight risk. If they
Oof.
come in here, they're going to be a flight risk. They're not going to be happy doing this lower level work, and so therefore, they're not going to be. So it's like so, and they used to do this with location too. This used to drive me nuts because I've had employers tell me that we're not going to move forward to candidacy because you live too far away from the location. And it's like, shouldn't I be the one to determine whether or not that commute works for me? I had an hour and a half commute at my old job, and I did that for 4 years straight. Yet your commute's only 45 minutes. I'm looking at it as this is a positive thing, and you're looking at it as because you had a bias because the last person you hired couldn't get to work on time, and they live 30 minutes away. And so you saying, oh, 45 minutes, you're definitely not going to be able to get to work on time. So
or it's a shield for something else that they feel like you're too old for this job, right? I mean,
and I think with the age thing, I think that's like, it doesn't fit the mold. So like for that particular example, so you'll find that in a lot of cases where succession planning, for those purposes, there's also a bias against a person who has gone far enough down their career path that they are either a known commodity or they're like, I hate to use this term because this is really ugly, but like damaged goods in some way. Like if you were never I've heard hire, and this is something that I've heard very commonly. And it always disgusts me when I hear it, but I've heard hiring managers say, why wasn't he promoted or he or she promoted in that previous role? Now, there is probably some degree of truth to a person who has a long career that has never successfully moved into the type of role that they're applying to now. And again, we take the ownership in our career, and through meticulous career planning, you should have a much stronger strategy to get there. However, there are people who maybe truly do have the competency that are never being considered because they don't fit the mold, and a manager has a bias.
What about the high performing individual contributor? Like, why isn't there that IC sort of role defined out there? And what have you seen that? Have you seen this as something that's a major problem across industries, or is it more prevalent in tech?
There, like in tech, I used to find it a lot where you could be a principal level engineer and be very highly compensated. In fact, one of my coaching clients he worked at it was one of the FANGs. I forget which one. I think it may have been Google, and he was being recruited to go to a hardware like an NVIDIA or something like that. But they were throwing like we were working through an offering negotiation for him, and it was like in the 300,000 to 400,000 range, and we were getting him up into the fives, and we were actively negotiating this thing. And I'm sitting here thinking like, shit, like why be a leader and take on all that extra burden and responsibility when you're making this much money? And he's very technical. Some people don't want that leadership in the beginning part of their career. They don't want the leadership. They want to just be really involved in the tech. They want to be involved, the hands-on. And then maybe at some point later in life, they evolve and they decide, you know what? I actually would like to try that. And I passed up opportunities before at my previous, my dwell time, purposefully. And now I'm changing my mind and I want to go back into it. And then the bias becomes real. It's an ageism thing that now the hiring manager is resume screening. I hate when they do this because it's like when I'm screening a candidate and I'm going through and asking questions that I know for sure the hiring manager is going to likely ask. If I see like weird things on your resume that I know are a red flag, I need to get in front of them because I need to present them to the hiring. I need to basically market you to the hiring manager and say that this candidate actually meets the requirements of the position, because I already know that they're going to run interference on it and they're going to pull. And it's called resume screening. They'll resume screen a resume that we send over to them, and they'll poo it because they'll make these assumptions. They'll paint this career history, and I'll sit there and have the notes, like especially with a really smart candidate that's really well spoken and we have a good conversation. I have like good notes, and then the hiring manager will make these like determinations based on a piece of paper. And then I'll say, well, how did you come up with that story? Did you talk to this candidate? Because that's not what they told me. They told me something very different than the narrative that you've now created. And they'll just say, well, in my experience, well, your experience is wrong. Like you have an experience, like talk to the candidate, or then I don't need to be involved in this process anymore. If you don't trust my screen, then why am I even here screening these candidates? I'll just hand them right to you. I'll source them and send them right to you. You can do all the screens if you don't trust what we say. And that happens all the time. Like that's like bad partnership is what I would say. Is like when a hiring manager thinks that they know better than everybody else, and especially like they know better than the recruiters, who's like literally talks to hundreds of candidates, each and every week, or sees hundreds. So, how can you, if you're a candidate in those types of situations, I mean, it comes down to how do you market yourself? It's very careful marketing.
Bryan, let me put it this way. I used to get, and I'm very fortunate to be able to say this, but I used to get just a constant stream of inbound inquiries from recruiters. Please apply to our job for this. Please apply to our job here, etc. And it was all the time. And I felt very grateful. And I will say that I typically have found jobs through my network and through connections. So not through those outbound outreaches. But anyhow, nonetheless, it was always this kind of great feeling to know that I was in demand. And I have to tell you, and I know that the economy is not great right now. And so that is part of this. But as soon as I hit 40, those inbound inquiries that are coming from recruiters, they fell off a cliff for me. Can you tell me a little bit about your perspective on that?
I mean, I think it's partially due to the state of the economy. I mean, granted, I haven't been in recruiting in a hot minute, like the last 2 or 3 years. I've not actively been looking for jobs. But I know in the peak of the market, even like a year ago, I was getting, I don't know, it was like 10 or 15 a week for recruiter jobs that were like paying pretty well, multiple offers and things like that. And I would say that's dried up a fair amount over the last year, as obviously recruiters just kind of went off the cliff. I don't know what kind of work you did in tech beforehand, but it depends on the type of work that you're doing and the market for it. There's just not a lot of demand. There's a ton of supply. There's like, yeah, anecdotally, I had 750 people apply to a VP of information technology job that I posted, and it was posted for 26 hours. I posted it on a Tuesday at like 3 p.m. and by Wednesday, close of business, I had to shut it down because there was too many candidates. And we have a commitment to 48-hour turnaround. We have to disposition each candidate in 48 hours, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to hit that metric, so I had to turn it off. I mean, could it happen where a hiring manager is resume screening you? Yeah, I'm sure. Of course, that could be the case. I will say this. I have counted years of experience because of a certain threshold, but it's usually at like minimum number of years. And maybe somebody doesn't reach the bar, like, okay, we have to have somebody that has at least 5 to 7 years. And I've got my whole opinion on like years of experience and like how much of a true indicator that is to fit for the job. But sometimes I'll go through and count the years of experience just to make sure that you meet the minimum threshold for a particular bar that's been set. But I've never personally screened somebody out because they had to. Now, it's hard to not say that there's not a bias when you see somebody on their resume that lists out that they started working in 1985 and they have a bunch of technology that's not even relevant anymore. It's like sunsetted and obsolete, and they use like a AOL online email address and all this kind of stuff, right? That it's hard to not like on some level kind of judge, like, are they truly up, especially in the tech world where it is more like let's face it, like tech bros like to judge people, like
No.
so it's, is that a possibility? I would say maybe. I think it might be more of a symptom of being in an unemployed situation in a market that is very not advantageous for an unemployed person. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of candidates. Tech has been hit extremely hard. Tech and recruiting are the two hardest hit industries through this round of this latest round of layoffs. I'm hoping that it doesn't spill more into other areas, although it has to a degree spilled in other areas too. But that could be part of the issue. It's all about careful, like, how do you build your online presence? Like, if I'm going back on my resume, I'm probably only going back 10, maybe 12 years, especially if that's the threshold or the bar that's set for the types of jobs that I'm applying to. If they're saying, I've never encountered a job that required 20 years of experience unless it was like a senior director VP. So there's no point in me putting out a resume that shows that I've got 40 years of experience when I only need 5 or 7. So I would say carefully crafting a resume that removes any indicators that, don't make it easy for somebody to like, I hate to say this because it just seems like a cop out, but don't make it easy for somebody to discriminate against you. Like make it as easy as possible. So
Give yourself that at bat, right? I mean, Absolutely. I listened to one of your videos or watched one of your videos on YouTube recently, and you said something that has been a part of my own personal creed as I've been interviewing. And it's really, hey, I never let people know anything personal about me. I don't let people, I mean, I'll here and there a little bit, but for example, I would never go out there and start talking about my kids openly during an interview because guess what? The person is, especially if that person happens to be a lot younger than I am, that person might have a bias against me because I'm a mother. And there are all these associations with working mothers, right? And so why enter that into the equation, right? I just, and then on the flip side, there are times when I'm like, screw it. I'm going to be me. And if they don't like it, I don't want to work here. So, it depends on where you are in your job search process and, the level of, I mean, you might be at a point where you just need a job, whatever the job is,
Yeah,
because
just
you
stop the
have
bleeding. Yeah.
exactly. So anyway, but that's been part of my creed as a job seeker. It's just like, don't give them a chance to discriminate against you. Just
Yeah. And I mean,
try to keep it
there's a
out.
thing about like building rapport with your interviewer,
Yeah.
commonalities, you see a picture
Read
on
the
their
room.
desk that's, yeah, read the room, where, you obviously with a family, you want to be in a place that is work for a boss that is supportive of flexibility and understanding that sometimes kids get sick and sometimes they'll come into the room while you're on your Zoom call with your coworker, or sometimes you've got to go get kids from school and things like that. But yeah, in general, I might reserve those till I get a little further in the interview process and after you've made your first impressions, because it's like that first impression is the biggest hurdle to get past. If you're somebody that is advanced in your career and you're interviewing for a role that might be a little lower, where that might be an issue, your goal is to try to get the first impression. You don't want your resume to be the first impression, or I should say it is going to be the first impression, your lasting impression. You don't want that to be the lasting impression. If you can figure out a way to get into the interview process and then convince them through your overwhelming charm and your immense skill set and all this stuff, then you ideally are shaping the hiring manager's perception, because I've had hiring managers that I've convinced them to talk to a candidate because I knew that they were good. Like I talked to them and their resume did not read well. It did not show them as the level. I made assumptions on a candidate, and I'm like, well, I'm going to call them because they do have a couple of skills on their resume that are interesting. So then I'll call them and I'll be like blown away by them. They're like, wow, this was a really good interview. And this candidate is really sharp and impressive. And then I will send it over to the hiring manager with my meticulous notes and I'll go to bat for the candidate. I'll say, I really think you should talk to this candidate. And they'll say, yeah, but they'll have the same issues that I had with it. And I'll say, but I really think you should talk to this candidate. And so then when they finally go, okay, if you really think that it's fine, you put them on, I give them a half hour on my calendar and I'll talk to them. And then they go in and I know that they're going to kill it. And they go in and they hit it out of the park. And the hiring manager's like, that guy was really good. I go, yeah, I told you, like, why don't you, so now suddenly that the perception changes. There have been times where I've even gone back to a candidate and go like, I can't send this resume over without, yeah, I want to give you the highest chance of likelihood of like that I can get you into the interview process with the hiring manager, but your resume is just not going to cut it. Like, can you massage this, add this, maybe remove that?
They need your course.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. If you need any help, the Resume Rock Review course actually is really a good course for that. But teaching you exactly how to write, that resume that is going to help, like not only the recruiter, but help you get the hiring manager to not resume screen you, because I've seen that happen countless times. Because you want to get into the interview process and then have your competency and your ability, your personality, your marketing skill to then be able to get you to really make that impression. So if you're somebody that's advanced in age, that should be the goal. So you might even want to sprinkle in some very strategic networking. It sounds like you've leveraged networks in the past, which is great. And that's probably the number one most preferred way. Like skip the recruiter. That's what you ideally want to do, and leveraging LinkedIn
No
and other
offense.
places. No,
Love recruiters.
I love
You
I love
preach
when
it,
people
right?
skip. Yeah, I love when people skip me, because then it's easy. Like if you can get the hiring manager excited about you, and then the hiring manager come back to me and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
this is really," then it's one less candidate that I got to convince a hiring manager is good. I still get credit for the hire. I don't care.
There you go.
Like
There you go.
my metrics still look good. If it doesn't matter where the candidate, if the candidate comes in from an employee referral at your church, I don't care. Like
That's perfect.
so long
Bryan's
as
killing it.
yeah, they don't care. All they look at is I own that rec and I got a hire in a certain number of days. That's all all they care about.
There you go. That's the metric that matters for a recruiter. Interesting. So yeah, help them out. You heard it here. Well, and actually I had a friend who just got a job pretty much that way. He was interested in a company and he went on LinkedIn to a CEO who he'd met once, right? And he sent an email via or LinkedIn email or whatever it's called. In-mail, I think, get it right. But he sent an in-mail and he was like, hey, I'm really interested in this role at your company. What do you think? And the CEO wrote him back, put him in touch with the hiring manager. He got a job like 2 days later. He didn't even apply for the job online, right? Like that is how this works. It's the interpersonal connections. It's going straight to the source. It's asking the right person, right? It's not just throwing your resume into a black hole.
Yeah. And targeted networking is probably my preferred way of approaching job search with the highest degree of strength. Because I've had candidates I've had even clients like students of mine that have gone through and gotten hired without even ever producing a resume before.
Yeah.
And
It's happened to me before.
People hear these stories about, I share them on my, I wrote a newsletter article last week about how there was a guy that successfully negotiated a $350,000 compensation package increase on the original offer. And people were all calling it BS. And I'm like, I'm not making this crap up. Like, why would I make I'm not like, I don't need your click or your comment. It's against the sinister. It's like the sinister nature of it. But if you actually truly understood how he did it, and I broke it down in that newsletter article, if you really understood how he did it, there's a methodical process and it's very clever. And it is not common, but it is, that's why it's like you use it to your advantage. If you put the work in and do the things that you need to take the extra steps necessary to set yourself apart, nobody else is doing it. They're all busy just going onto YouTube and onto LinkedIn complaining about the process, but rather than actually doing something about it. And the ones who are actually taking advantage of it are the ones who are getting the jobs that the people are complaining about, like they're in these interviews. So like it's worth putting in the time and the energy to build your personal branding is kind of what it comes down to. People think personal branding is just for LinkedIn influencers and business owners and that sort of thing. And everybody has a brand. Look around your department now. Every single person has a brand. You're either the guy that's at the water cooler complaining all the time. You're the person who's always skating out of work. You're the person who's always kissing the butt of the boss and being annoying.
Failing up.
Or you're the person that's failing up, or you're just the steady Eddie who comes in every day and at 5:00 he's gone and you never see him again until the next day. And, everybody has a brand that they're building. And like, how are you known in the organization that you worked in? And it's important. Your personal brand is important inside the organization, but it's even more important at the industry level. Like, how are you perceived at the industry level? Because that's where it is the networking, the personal branding really has a huge impact. And I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even into the millions of dollars over the course of a career if you have a well-crafted personal brand.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are very resistant to, but I'm sorry, it's reality.
And that's what the leadership teams are looking at. They know what your personal brand is. And that's people who, not everybody, but some people who get on layoff lists, they don't have the best personal brand. Not all. I mean, I know that there's like, especially in the recent times, because so many people have gotten laid off, but the person who has the stronger brand, you're going to be more likely to stay away from a layoff list.
Absolutely. So Bryan, it sounds like hopefully the tides are turning somewhat and we'll see fewer layoffs over the course of the next few months. Let's fingers crossed on that one. But I guess I'd like to know from your perspective, what are the things that people who are still employed today what can they do actually? What can they do to help prevent themselves from being on that next layoff list? And then conversely, if you have been a victim of a layoff or you shortly will be, what are the things that you can do to get back on your feet as quickly as possible and take ownership of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm somebody that is I think everybody should be taking proactive steps to protect themselves, even if you think that you're relatively safe, because how many people, if you scroll through LinkedIn, especially when there's times of like higher amounts of layoffs, how many people say, "Oh, I never saw this coming. I was completely unaware." And it's like, even though like everybody around you is laying off, like, even in your own company, they've done 2 other rounds of layoffs. And like, I mean, I just don't know how somebody could be caught totally off guard. But again, it's like the acting like the owner of your career. So I'm taking stock of how did my employer behave in 2020 when there was the first major round of layoffs? How did they behave in 2022? And if they haven't behaved in the right way, I'm certainly putting proactive steps in place to protect my income, actively saving money. I'm not taking out any big loans. I'm not going off and getting new expensive cars, houses, etc. Adding to my debt. I'm trying to pay my debt down. It's kind of the basic stuff like a Dave Ramsey type might say, protecting and getting your ship in order, so to speak, get everything tightened up and have that emergency fund. And then I would be actively making sure that my work is as valuable as it can be. I'm making sure that I'm as visible as I can be. And that means, volunteering for certain, and this kind of goes against the whole, like, there's this whole quiet quitting thing. I've talked about it on my channel a lot, and it's kind of like these iterations of the workflow. It's like all this stuff is dependent on the law of supply and demand. You don't see a ton of quiet quitters when nobody's hiring, like when there's jobs everywhere, it's easy to quiet quit and, great resignation and all that stuff. But when there's no jobs anywhere, you don't see nearly as many. In fact, the statistics are supporting that suddenly nobody's practicing quiet quitting. You just looked at everybody around you getting lopped and you're like kind of looking around, you gotta be wondering. So I would be trying to make myself as invaluable, especially if I'm thinking that there might be some risk. My industry has been at risk. They're putting, like, look for projects that are being put on hold. Look for, if they come to your department and anybody, especially in HR, asks you how you spend your day. They send out some sort of a spreadsheet. They put it under the auspice of, we're just trying to get an understanding of the amount of work, what each person's focusing on. Like, even if it's like informal, like, oh, we're a new leadership team and we're just coming in just to understand the workflow better and get a better handle on things
Yeah,
so we can improve efficiency.
totally.
I
Or
mean,
you
they're
get the
100.
Bob's consultants from the
Yeah.
office space, like
Yep.
they come
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Or, being asked to rank anything, like, all of those are major red flags that I would be actively, trying to update my resume. But keep your resume up to date. Like, that's not something that you want to start scrambling with the day of, you get laid off. And, like, you're like me, I had to go and, like, dust off an old Frankenstein resume and try to update it. So doing all this stuff when you're, building your networks, and network building is not just going and connecting with Joe who sits in the stall next to you, or Jim who goes to your church, or Bob, the neighbor down the street, or whatever. It is targeted networking of people who can actually help you in your career. There's methods to do it. It's going to be on the scope of this, but there's methods to do that you would want to start really actively. Your network is not going to produce a lot of fruit just because you get laid off and you go off and put up a post and say, I need help, somebody help me out. Your network is designed to help you get out of situations or to pull you into new situations, and you can leverage it. I've not generally experienced much positive results to, I need a job, my network, please help me. Like, that kind of messaging never works. But where it does work is, you can start putting, kind of like you've done, put feelers out there and, let people know that you're open to opportunities in a more stable environment. And then if you have a strong enough personal brand, that's where it can bear fruit. But I'm certainly making sure that my LinkedIn profile is up to date, is current, and I'm active on there, and making sure that I've got all my tools. And then I'm kind of hunkering down. And if I did happen to get laid off and I'm unfortunate enough, I'm not panicking. I'm going to make sure that I have all those tools set up. And then I'm going to start, obviously, active jobs are just going to be part of it, active networking. But I would be focusing on also trying to, I know that, like, there's the side hustle culture can be toxic. Like, there is like a degree, I think, because so many people had gotten laid off in the last 18 months, so many people starting these side hustles and everybody seems to have one. It can be a little bit toxic. And some people will say, like, that, don't do a side hustle. But then I sit there and I go, why would you not want at least some income security? Because when you rely 100% on some other entity to provide for, like, your sole source of income, then you're putting yourself at extreme risk, because then those are the types of people who then have to make panic decisions to take less than stellar job opportunities just to stop the bleeding. And once
It's
you
just
do
like
that,
investing.
yeah, it's just like
investing, diversify your income streams. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of the same thing, and you'll start to kind of go down a vicious spiral. It's like you get that bad job, but then that bad job suddenly brands you for another bad job. But then now you've got a resume that used to be strong that's now weakening. I always say this: every single job that you take either strengthens or weakens your resume. It's just like going to the gym. You never stay the same. You either, if you're in a job for too long, it weakens your resume. If you're not in a job long enough, it weakens your resume. If you jump to too many jobs, it's like the porridge, the just right. Like how, and being.
Although I hope we give some real grace to people over the last 3 years, because that's been bizarre.
I can't speak for other. I'm sure there's a lot more recruiters because they've gotten laid off. That hopefully there's some sympathetic recruiters out there that you'll be dealing with. But I know I've never cared about that stuff when I was sourcing. I didn't care so long as you could justify. If you had something abnormal, just so long as you could justify. Now, if you were job hopping every 6 months, you had a new job, then I probably couldn't move forward with you. But if you were, if you had compelling reasons why, just the employment. So we just don't want the hiring manager to create a fictitious story about you before they've even talked to you. That's kind of the main thing with the resume. But that's what I'm doing. I'm actively building income streams, making sure that my tools are up to date, and I'm leveraging very targeted networking to help get to increase my callback ratio, because the callback ratio should be 20%. I'd like to see at least 20% callbacks for every app. So every 10 applications, you should be getting at least 2 callbacks. And if you're not getting at least 2 callbacks, assuming you're reasonably qualified for the jobs you're applying to, then it's almost always a resume issue. And then it just tweaking, and like, don't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. If you're not getting results from what you're doing, adjust. Look at it with a objective eye and say, where am I falling? Am I not getting enough interviews? Am I not getting enough phone interviews? Am I not getting enough hiring manager screens? Where am I falling out of the process? And then troubleshoot that, because it's kind of like symptoms going to a doctor. They have to know where you're aching so they can help you. So that's what I would do if I was in a situation where I was thinking a layoff was coming. And then if I was if I made videos too, if somebody wants more detail on like how exactly to survive a layoff, I've got probably 3 or 4 videos. You can just search the channel and you can find them.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely be sending everybody over to your channel. It's great. I've been following it for quite some time, and I'm excited about this audience getting to access that as well. I think you have some great tips. You have a really wonderful sort of way about you, real talk sort of aura. And I think it's really important because, like you said, we can all just complain about things, or we can accept reality and move forward with that and be intentional about where we end up with our career. So I think it's really, really important. And I'm happy to have had you here to share all of these good tidbits with the audience. So thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I like that intentional. I like that.
Yeah. Well, I've actually not been so intentional in some ways, but now, it's funny because it's like, you don't necessarily set out on a path intentionally, but over time you gain credibility and skills and know-how, and you, maybe it wasn't your passion when you started out. Maybe you can't believe you fell into tech. Like for me, I used to be in journalism and then I fell into tech. And then over time you start to like what you do because you get good at it. And then you just keep getting job after job offer. And then you keep on making more and more money. And then it becomes very hard to extract yourself. Right. So
you allow the employer to brand you. And that's usually a symptom of not having the career strategy from, out of the gate.
Yep.
That's a lot of times what we try to fix on the back end of career coaching is how do you fix that? And it's not as easy once you get so far down the path.
And it is tough too, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I give myself a little bit of latitude in the sense that I wasn't sure what I would like until I tried it. And then a little bit of this. And that's
part of the discovery process. Most people don't know what they want to be when they grow up, really.
Right.
It takes a little bit of trial and error.
It sure does. And not everybody can be like a baseball player or a singer or celebrity, whatever, right?
Although I do have lottery tickets. I've got lottery tickets over my wall.
Do you?
If I become a billionaire, I think I'll probably shut my channel down. So
yeah, I think that's fair. Although it's very clear to me that you love what you do, which it shines through. And I love the story of how you got to where you are. So thank you for sharing that too.
Yeah, my pleasure.